Thanks everyone for being here. I do appreciate it. This is more of just a fun hobby for me, researching history, and thanks for being here so I can share it with you. Like Jim said, we did 2 books on the iron industry. I'm very passionate on the industrial history in Blair County. I don't know, I just like thinking about how hard the men and women worked here in America to build up America today. So I believe that the industrial history is something that I was always attracted to. So last year we started researching Jim Snyder. You want to stand up or wave? And he helped me research. And Sam Dean, my editor in the back, he helped with, if you want to stand, put your hand up. He helped me with the writing and editing. And together we came up with this new book about what came after the iron industry here in Blair County. And we'll talk about that in the presentation here. This is the book we did last year, Blair County Iron. And this is the book we did back in 2023 on the iron furnaces of the Cove. Here's my family, my little one, Nathaniel, Lucas to the left, he's 8, my wife, Danielle, and Levi. And we like to go out on adventures, family exploring and just getting out and having fun and seeing history. There's so much to do in Blair County and all over central Pennsylvania that we try to go explore. It doesn't cost any money, and it's a lot of fun to do when we have time away from work. This is at the Military Museum in Boalsburg. And this is at the C&O Canal Trail in Maryland, which is a really fun place. Before we start our presentation on limestone and Ganister, I just kind of want to do a brief summary on the iron industry because that's what led into this. Back in 1809, the iron industry came to Blair County. And this is a typical iron furnace layout. Iron was the first heavy industry in Blair County, and it all starts with iron ore, rock. It's very heavy, and it's full of iron minerals. And they would mine this, and they would take the iron ore to furnaces. And this is an iron furnace. It's a stone structure, and they would always have it underneath an embankment. And the men would load iron ore, limestone, and charcoal, and they would smelt it at 2,500 to 3,000 degrees, and they would produce what they'd call pig iron. Because down at the bottom, the men would extract the liquid molten iron out of the furnace. It would come out in these metal castings. And if you see the castings at the bottom, it looks like a mama pig with her piglets drinking off of mama. So they called it pig iron. Pig iron was common. They would use it all around in the communities. These iron furnaces basically brought people to live around the furnaces and to work. It was basically the first communities in Blair County. And early on, they would make iron products like kettles, pots and pans, construction materials, wrought iron, nail spikes, wagon wheels, farming equipment, cultivators, anything they needed iron for. They would make the iron at the furnaces, and then they would take the iron to forges where they would make the products. But this is Allegheny Furnace in Altoona. This is owned by ran by Eliza Baker from the Baker Mansion. And this is the Springfield Furnace out in between Clappertown and Williamsburg. And what's interesting about this picture is taken around the Civil War. It was built in 1815 by the Royers. And I just imagine, if you're coming in from out of the area, on your horse and wagon, bringing your family to town, you just come upon this big blast furnace. I can't imagine what that would have been like. So these furnaces ran all day producing iron. Here's the ruins of the furnace today, what's left. Here's another furnace, Martha Furnace in McKee Gap. This is probably around 1870, 1880. And early iron furnaces were producing maybe 40 to 50 tons of iron per week at a good furnace. This one was producing about 250 tons per week, situated right along the railroad. And at this time, we were getting very industrial in America, a lot of infrastructure, big cities, railroads. I mean, America was really building fast, and that's the term industrial revolution. There was a lot of this industrial history around. Here's Rodman Furnace. This is in Roaring Spring. They did about 300 tons of iron per week, and they produced iron for the Rodman gun. Here's an ore. Oh, sorry. What's going on here? Something must have. Where's my tech team? Something up there. It's for some reason it's not coming up the next. Oh, here we go.
Huh. Can try the good old plug it in, unplug it and plug it back in.
Yeah, sounds good. Sorry.
Yeah, you're fine. Not sure why it's doing that.
Okay, we're back on this. Maybe we start over from here, from beginning.
Yep.
Okay, I'll just kind of,
Okay.
maybe this
Just
will,
fly
maybe just
through.
fly through real quick. And
Hopefully.
okay, thank you. I think we're good now.
All right.
Thank you. Back during the iron industry, this is an old iron ore pit. I been to lots of iron ore mining sites, and they would extract iron ore, and that was the main commodity for the iron furnaces. Here's another ore pit and Warrior's Mark that supplied Bald Eagle Furnace and Tyrone with their iron. Here's a steam shovel at a Bloomfield Mines in Ore Hill. And this is probably around the 1880s, 1890s. They were getting better equipment for mining. This is the Grove Brothers on Tussey Mountain. They started going underground and did a lot of underground mining along Tussey Mountain. And along Tussey Mountain, there was said to be over 200 underground mine shafts along Tussey Mountain. The iron industry peaked here it was about done over about 1896, but a lot of iron ore mining here would continue on to about 1930. We'd supply a lot of iron ore for Pittsburgh for the steel industry. This is McClanahans. If anyone heard of the McClanahans in Hollidaysburg, they've been around since the beginning of the iron industry, and they're still in operation today. We'll discuss them. And this is the last iron furnaces that I'll touch on before we get into the presentation. This is Chimney Rock's furnace on the right of the river and Gaysport on the left of the river. They were the last blast furnaces in Blair County. 1896, Gaysport furnace closed its doors. And the iron industry was huge here, but it would shift into the steel industry, and that's what we'll talk about here. After the iron industry is over, a man named Henry Bessemer would come around and invent the Bessemer system. And when they would produce their pig iron was actually not as strong, and it was kind of brittle. And Henry Bessemer developed a different way of smelting the iron ore through a Bessemer converter, and it was, my understanding, it was a lot about how they forced air during the smelting process, and it would create steel, which is a heavier process than making pig iron. And once the steel industry switched over, it was such a superior product that they pretty much closed iron furnaces everywhere, and they would start making steel. In our area, Blair County, all the iron furnaces closed, and steel furnaces would go to Johnstown, go to Pittsburgh, other larger cities. And here's a little bit of an explanation of the Bessemer process. Now we start seeing lots of steel blast furnaces. I believe this is in Johnstown, but there's a huge industry in Johnstown. They went from iron to steel, and to Pittsburgh, we see these large blast furnaces, basically leaving Blair County out of iron making. They would shift to the steel industry, and Blair County would no longer do iron furnaces. This is Andrew Carnegie. He was a very successful steel industrialist, and he did had a lot of steel furnaces. Just to give you an example, in 1875, there was 700 blast furnaces in America. And it says here they would make about 5.5 million tons of iron each year. By 1900, with the new steel furnaces coming in, it would drop down to about 400 iron furnaces in America, but they were producing 27.8 million tons of iron of steel per year. So the steel blast and the Henry Bessemer system was superior to iron making. And in 2020, it says we only have 16 blast furnaces in America. So, I mean, from 700 to 16, I'm sure it's maybe down to 10 now. But there's lots of different ways to make steel. They have a lot of scrap yards, and they take them to refinery mills, mini mills they call them. So the steel industry isn't even what it used to be. Okay, so how would Blair County move forward after the iron industry? That's what I wanted to figure it out. I wanted to learn what came after Blair County. And there was lots of, things around here that I knew of, and I wanted to kind of learn about it, because that was kind of my biggest curiosity, was what came after the iron industry. Outside of the railroad, what were we doing here? I have to introduce a little bit of history on the McClanahans. I'm not expert with the McClanahans, but this is James Craig McClanahan. He started out at Cove Forge working for his uncle. And I'm not sure who that connection was, but the Roars owned Cove Forge. And very young man, he went to work for Cove Forge, and he learned the forging business and making equipment. He would then move on to some different forges and foundries in Huntington County, where he really learned lots of good skills, to where he eventually started his own foundry in Hollidaysburg. And today that foundry is still in operating. It's McClanahan foundry. I think there's 6 generations, maybe 7 generations, not quite for sure. But that's a key part of our history moving forward after the iron industry. This is his son, John King McClanahan. And he is, the McClanahans are very big industrialists in the limestone industry moving forward. And this is John King's son, John King McClanahan Jr. And after the iron industry was over, there was a heavy need for limestone in Pittsburgh and the steel industries. They don't have limestone in Pittsburgh, Cambria County. They have a lot of sandstone. Blair County has some of the best limestone in Pennsylvania, and we had a lot of it. With McClanahan and the connections they had with Andrew Carnegie and the steel industries, they bridged Blair County to Pittsburgh and a lot of the other steel mills, and we would start providing our limestone by railroad to these steel mills. And this industry was huge for about 40 years. And steel making limestone acts as a flux. A flux goes in with the iron ore. During the smelting, it removes the impurities, and it forms a product called slag. That's the waste product during the smelting process. And you need that limestone to pull the impurities out during the steel making process. And this is what a slag dump would look like at a steel mill. They would just dump the molten hot slag, and that slag would, cool down and become like a rock form, and it'd be considered waste. The first industrial site in Blair County that I would like to introduce to you, I'm going to introduce all the industrial sites in Blair County that we felt were significant. This is Canoe Creek State Park. Has anyone ever been to the Canoe Creek kilns? Pretty popular place. Right here you see the ruins of the kilns. And John King McClanahan Jr. would open these kilns up in 1907, and he would operate them until 1915. And what they would do was they would mine and quarry limestone, bring it down above the kilns. This is a model of the kilns that you can find at the visitor park at Canoe Creek. This is what they would have looked like during its operation. But they would come overhead with the dinky carts. They would dump the limestone inside the kiln. They would mix it with coal, and they would burn it for maybe up to a day. Do you think that's right, James? About a day, or? Yeah, about 2 to 3 days, and they would make each batch about 18 tons maybe of lime. And so they had 6 kilns running, and you can see the rail cars. They actually built a railroad from the Petersburg Railroad, and they would bring it through Canoe Creek over to the kilns, and they would ship the lime to Pittsburgh and Johnstown and whoever their buyers were, which was actually Jones and McLaughlin Steel in Pittsburgh. They would ship the lime to Pittsburgh. This operation lasted for, like I said, it was short-lived, about 8 years. Basically, it was a great operation. It was very costly. Transportation was basically kind of what shut it down. This is standard equipment then is a dinky cart. This is common mining equipment that they used. They would put the stone and they would pull these carts through the quarries with mules or horses, and they would take them to where they needed to offload it. And that was kind of their standard equipment for mining. This is an underground mine shaft in Canoe Creek. I found out this last winter that Canoe Creek, they have about 5 to 6 underground mines that they were actually going into the mountain. Early on, before 1907, they were coring at the surface, and the men would dynamite, they would take the rock, they would sledgehammer it, break it to about softball size, put it in the dinky carts, load it to the railroad, send it to Pittsburgh, and there again, they would use that for flux in the steel industry. And but when they had the kilns, they decided to start mining underground, and it was really fun. These are actually bat caves now that the park turned into a place for the bats to have a habitat. If anyone ever doesn't realize, over at Canoe Creek, there's another set of kilns, and this is the Hartman kilns. It was started by Jesse Hartman. It's on the backside of Canoe Creek, over towards Beaver Dam Road. He had 2 kilns over there. There again, Jesse Hartman did quick lime for the steel industry, and he also sold agricultural lime to the farmers. This is Jesse Hartman from Hollidaysburg, very successful businessman. He's in this presentation more than once. Here's the ruins of the Hartman kilns. There's some structures. A lot of it's been removed. Here's a big retaining wall that the dinky carts would come over to load the kilns. And this was a cool experience. I got to go inside an underground mine by luck one day. So Jim Snyder and myself were exploring, and we knew about the mines, so we went up and we stood outside the bars and took some pictures. And when we walked back to the parking lot, there were some government workers coming in with some other employees, and they were going to research some of the bats. And we caught wind of that, and I asked them if I could join them to take pictures and document for history project, and they let me go. That was really, really exciting experience. So although going inside the mines is an awesome experience, I got to learn a lot about bats. These people were obsessed with bats. But it was pretty neat. Very large, and they go way in there. And there's 5 or 6 of these in Canoe Creek. It's really, really, really awesome. Another industrialist we need to touch base on is John Manning. His nickname was Limestone Yank. He was a very early limestone industrialist in Blair County, and he did a lot of his mining on Bald Hill. This is in Frankstown. Bald Hill situates from Lower Scotch Valley Road along Route 22. It runs all the way till about Nix, which is former Melnix. And along that ridge, there was about 5 limestone mines that John Manning operated. And as early as Frankstown Furnace, they were mining limestone for their flux for the iron industry. And eventually they had their own locomotives and dinky tracks going up to the quarries. And they would also, John Manning would get involved with another man named James Funk. He was a sheriff in Duncansville, and he was a very big player in lime kilns industries, where he would have lime kilns. This is the Frankstown kilns. Sat close to Melnix at a used car lot, I believe. And but he had 2 large kilns there, and they produced agricultural lime for farmers, which during this time was a very big industry also for crop production. It would help improve soil for farming. It was a really big industry during the 1800s, or up until about the middle 1900s. But you can see a man here going in the top of the kiln with a wheelbarrow, got to dump the wheelbarrow of limestone in the kiln, probably mixing it with coal. Very dangerous job. I can't imagine, some men probably fell in at times. Is, a pretty dangerous job. So we'll touch base on some agricultural kilns. I'm sure a lot of people have seen lots of kilns around the area and wondered what they were. You can find these all around Blair County if you know where to look, especially in the farming communities, Martinsburg, Sinking Valley, New Enterprise, anywhere where there's a lot of farming, you'll see these these old kilns. And basically, a lot of these kilns were small. Farmers owned them, and they had a vein of limestone on their farm, and they would build these kilns maybe with a farmer down the street, or maybe 4 or 5 farmers would get together, and they would make their own lime for their fields, or maybe they would sell it to lots of other communities. But the lime kilns was a pretty big industry in Blair County, and we wanted to share that in this book. Okay, then another big aspect of the limestone industry that we wanted to share is the quarries in Williamsburg. Does anyone know where Williamsburg is? Blair County. Okay. Williamsburg today doesn't look like much, but back in the 1800s and the middle 1900s, it was one of the most prosperous areas in Blair County. During the early 1900s, there was over 2,000 quarrymen working 7 quarries in Williamsburg, all providing limestone for the steel industry. And I got to say, just visiting all these quarries, they're huge. They're massive. And I can't fathom how much limestone they took for the steel industry. I mean, it's very impressive. So this is Blair 4. This is in Williamsburg. And there's 2 large quarries around the Juniata River and over by the Petersburg Railroad, which you can see this along the lower rail trail. And they would produce lime for the flux industry in Pittsburgh, and they probably had multiple buyers. And they would quarry here for about 30 years. Here's an underground. They looked like they were starting a mine, and they have all their crushing equipment. This is a crusher where they would crush the limestone to whatever sizes they need. And notice there's a railroad, a spur line that they would. Back then they didn't have vehicles. They had railroads. So the railroad was huge in this industry. I mean, the railroad, they would just build a spur line right to these quarries where they could load up the limestone, send it to where they needed it. So that's why the railroad isn't around now in Williamsburg, because when the limestone industry closed up and the Ganister industry closed up and the clay works, they just pulled the tracks. But here's a general store at Blair 4. These quarries had communities around them. They had workers, they had little villages where they lived, and they had lots of miners that they would set their families up around these quarries, and it was a place to live, place to work. Here's another picture of Blair 4, and you got their dinky tracks being pulled by a small narrow gauge locomotive. Notice all the rail tracks in front. Basically, when they quarried and they'd move, they would keep quarrying back. They'd lay new tracks close by to where they were working. Another site in Williamsburg is Carlum. That's along the lower rail trail in Williamsburg as well. And that was started by John King McClanahan. He was around 70 years old at the time, and he was the second generation of McClanahan. And he started Carlum, and a lot of their limestone actually went to Johnstown to the Cambria Iron Company, which the Cambria Iron Company was started by Peter Schoenberger, the Iron King, and Iron Master up in Cambria County with the last name King, and they developed the Cambria Iron Company, which was a huge multiple company with different blast furnaces, different iron ore sites. They were a big company, but they sold their limestone to them. And this is John King McClanahan. This is the lower rail trail in Williamsburg, and unfortunately, I couldn't walk back in the quarry. It was on private property. But right along the railroad, you can find this old loading structure, and there was a base of a crusher, so the crusher would be on top, and it'd be right along the railroad. So when they crushed, they would load the rock right into the rail cars along the railroad, and they would ship it to where it needed to go. Behind these trees is a face of one of the quarries that I could see. Here's the Clover Creek Blue Holes. Clover Creek had a couple miles of quarries, and this was owned by the Pittsburgh Limestone Company, which John King McClanahan Jr. was involved. John King McClanahan had the Blair Limestone Company. Then he would actually partner with steel industrialist in Pittsburgh, and they formed the Pittsburgh Limestone Company. The Pittsburgh Limestone Company basically would buy out all the quarries in Williamsburg, and they would kind of take control of the limestone industry. But here again, this is another huge area they mined, and a lot of people scuba dive there today. It's on private property. It's a beautiful location. But along Clover Creek, there's a couple miles of quarries. They just took a lot of limestone out. And here's a picture of one of the quarries there, and you notice all the dinky tracks going back to the ledges of rocks. And Sam counted about 20 different dinky tracks going back to the ledges. So they would just, take the dinky carts. They would dynamite the quarry ledge, bust it up with sledgehammers, load the dinky carts, take it back on the spur line, load the rail cars, and send it to Pittsburgh. Here's another site along in the Ganister area. If anyone knows where Ganister Brothers mines today, in the Ganister section, there's another blue hole called St. Clair's, and it's also referred to as St. Mary's because there's a St. Mary's church right along 866. But this is another blue hole, another area there where the Pittsburgh Limestone Company was quarrying limestone. Out front along 866, you can see tipple loading area, the former rail bed, and they had it right above the rail bed so they could load the limestone. This is the road going back to St. Clair's, where Jim and I decided, hey, let's turn around because there's some cameras and posted signs. How about it, Jim? This is kind of a neat picture because this is along 866. The blue circle is St. Clair's blue hole. Across the street is the Ganister blue hole. To the right, you see all that mining. That's actually the Ganister Brothers quarry. And you can see today technology. Look how big that is today from Ganister Brothers. They're mining a lot of limestone there today. Across the street from St. Clair's is the Ganister blue hole. This is a heavy site. There again, along Warts Road, the Pittsburgh Limestone Company quarried limestone for about 4 miles along Warts Road. And this is the Ganister blue hole, and they got a lot of limestone out of that. This is along the Springfield branch of the Petersburg Railroad. The Springfield branch connected with Petersburg and ran all the way down to Ormenia, the Springfield furnace, and it would continue on down, and it would connect with some industries towards Martinsburg. But all these industries had their own railroads to run to gather the materials they needed and what they were selling. Here's a picture of the Ganister blue hole during its operation. That looks like a pretty big mule in the picture there. You see that? Here's some men working at the Ganister blue hole. There's a lot of injuries to these men. These men worked really hard. They blasted, dynamited, crushed stone, and there was a lot of accidents that we found out about in our research. That it was a really tough job for these early men. Whoops. Going right down the street from Ganister, you're going to follow Warts Road, and this is what they call Warts Quarry. And there's another large series of limestone quarries up the street from Ganister, and this was known as the Warts Quarry. And they provided flux rock for the steel industry. They had lime kilns. They were a heavy player with the steel industry also. Driving through Warts, you can just see large ledges where they blasted that. The rock's still there. There's so much limestone in Williamsburg. It's incredible. Along Warts Road, I found all these ruins. I don't know if this was the Warts station. There was a railroad that came through there, the Springfield branch, and I heard there was a Warts station. I'm not sure what those ruins are, but could have been anything. There was a dynamite. They made dynamite at the powder mills. Could have been one of those. Could have been this. This is they called it the Schmucker Quarry, which the Schmuckers started the quarries at Warts. And the Schmuckers go back to the Royers that own Springfield Furnace. And the Schmuckers were involved in the iron industry with the Royer family. And the Schmuckers would continue with that property, and they would own some of this property. But that's a really cool picture of the quarry there at Warts. Another very large quarry in Williamsburg is called Trap Rock. If anyone knows Cove Forge, this area was also owned by the Schmuckers. There again, the Cove Forge was owned by the Royers. Schmuckers was involved with the Royers, so they acquired this property. This area is actually called Schmucker Run. But Trap Rock actually provided all their rock for the railroad. They made railroad ballast, which railroad ballast goes underneath the tracks and along the timbers to support the railroad, to keep it stable for the railroad, the rail cars going along the railroad. And I can't imagine how much they shipped out of there for the railroad, because they were building rail lines everywhere back in those days. So they played a big role in providing limestone for the railroad. Here's the old rail bed that goes back to Trap Rock and also Clover Creek. Like I said, they had their rail lines that they would take right to the quarries. Here's a circle where Trap Rock is on the map. And I believe, I don't know, I think it's Hullbakers, I believe, might possibly own this site. I'm not sure. But they still have rights to mine and quarry limestone there. But it's such a bad spot with the mountain, Huntington Mountain there, that I don't think they're ever going to get approval to quarry there again. Here's another interesting quarry. This sat in McKee Gap, and this sits at Yurdy's salvage yard in McKee Gap. And this quarry was owned by Jesse Hartman, and they also provided flux rock to the steel industry. What's interesting about this rock? It's a hybrid. It's like a limestone, sandstone, iron mix rock. What's interesting is they still used it for flux. So I found that very interesting. You can see the rock has a lot of different mixes in it. This is Jesse Hartman, which Jesse Hartman started his career in Hollidaysburg as a clerk in a store. Then he ended up going to work at the Martha Furnace, and he became the manager at the Martha Iron Furnace in McKee Gap. And he made connections with Peter Schoenberger's grandson, P.S. Duncan. Peter Schoenberger was the Iron King. He owned over 10,000 acres in Blair County. He owned all the mountaintops. He owned all the property around here for timber when they made charcoal. So P.S. Duncan was heir to Peter Schoenberger's land. So Jesse Hartman was smart enough to make this connection with P.S. Duncan, and they would go into business together. And Jesse Hartman would end up buying a lot of P.S. Duncan's property for quarrying and Ganister. This happens to be one of his sites at McKee Gap at the quarry. Here's a picture in 1895 of their quarrying. They had a trestle all the way across McKee Gap that they loaded the railroad with their rock. It's pretty impressive. So before they had the road going through McKee Gap, and if you notice out front, there's a large pile of rock. That's actually slag rock from Martha Furnace, just a side note. And Terrascape Supply sits right there, Tussey Mountain mulch. But that trestle they would take the rock from the quarry and Ganister rock off the mountain, and they would load the rail cars. If anyone's from the Tyrone area, huge player in the limestone industry was A.G. Morris, very industrial man in Tyrone, and he had quarries for miles, and this is one of the blue holes he has. There again, on Quarry Road in Tyrone, I drove up, there's a couple miles of these quarries. I mean, it's just, I can't believe how much limestone they took out of here, but they sold it for flux in the steel industry. He also had a lot of lime kilns. Here's he has 4 lime kilns right here. They're kind of falling down, but he made lime for the flux industry, quick lime, also for the farming industry, and also for soda manufacturing at the time. Not sure how that played, but lime was used in lots of different reasons: cement, mortar, there's lots of other reasons for lime, and I'm sure he had buyers all over the place. He was situated right along the railroad, and he did very well. A.G. Morris really helped build Tyrone. He actually donated a lot of his gravel to the towns for the roads, and he was a very generous man to his workers. Another industry we get from limestone, that basically covered the limestone industry. And another industry is the Ganister rock mining. And if anyone knows what Ganister rock is, this is Ganister rock. It's a sandstone quartzite, and inside the properties inside this is like 99% silica, which they make silica bricks that would wrap the inside of blast furnaces for lining. And the silica bricks can withstand up to 3,000 degrees. And silica sand, patching, cement mortars, refractory materials for the steel industry. There again, that was a huge industry from the 1870s up until 1960. And they made they would quarry Ganister to make silica bricks. Here's just another, what they used it for. But if you think about back then, how many kilns they had, how many blast furnaces they had, they always needed to replace the bricks. So it was a huge, huge industry. And from my reading, Blair County had the best Ganister rock in the nation. And if anyone ever's been to the 1,000 Steps in Huntington, was anyone brave enough to go the whole way to the top? Cool. Yeah, it's a tough one. But the Ganister rock is always at the top of the mountain. And these men had to get to the top of the mountain to quarry the Ganister, and they would bring it down with inclines. It's all the same. Jesse Hartman, I call him the Ganister King. We gave him that title kind of after Peter Schoenberger. He owned about 7 mountaintops in our area, and he got into the Ganister industry. And here's Dunning's Mountain in Hollidaysburg, and this is this kind of follows Reservoir Road, and his first Ganister quarry was Dunning's Mountain. And Ganister rock is found all along the top of the mountain. It's everywhere. Here's an incline. So they would go to the top. They would have dinky cars, and they would have narrow gauge tracks. Here's a former narrow gauge track that goes along this cliff. And what's really interesting is if you go up there today, a lot of this is on game lands. You can walk these tracks for miles. It's very, very fun to explore. But they would have these narrow gauge rail lines on top of the mountains where earlier on they were pulled by mules. They had pulled dinky carts. Then they got small narrow gauge locomotives on these mountains, and they were pulling dinky carts all around the mountain, and they would just pick up Ganister rock, load it. They would blast it, load it, and they would take it down the incline and load it in the rail car. Here's an incline coming down McKee Gap, and I went up there with the Yurdy family because here's where the incline comes down, right by the trestle that went across the gap. And when I went up there with the Yurdys, our mission was to find this incline. And we got to the peak where the dinky tracks came around the mountain. We seen some excavations, and then we looked down. We seen the mountainside was like all the rock was moved off to the sides, and there was a straight run down the mountain. I was like, that's definitely the incline. And we could see where maybe the former winch sat right above the incline. It was really, really neat. This operated from around 1870, and Jesse Hartman would actually end up kind of leaving there, and he would go to Canoe Mountain, right behind Canoe Creek. And this is an awesome picture. This is the Sylvan Incline. And if anyone knows where Canoe Mountain is, it's right behind, it's heading down 22 towards Williamsburg. And it sits right behind Canoe Creek. But if you look up the mountain, that's the incline. They brought dinky cars down that. And they would load the railroad across the Juniata River, and they would put it right in the rail cars. The section of Ganister today used to be Franklin Forge, named after the Royers. They had a forge there. The railroad, the Pennsylvania Railroad, was getting so much Ganister rock out of this area. They changed the name. The railroad changed the name to Ganister. So today that area is known as Ganister because the Ganister rock they got off the mountain. They were taking lots of Ganister rock off the mountain. This is a really cool picture of a dinky car coming down the mountain with a guy riding down it on it. But they were pulled up and down the mountains, and like I said, the workers up top would be loading this rock by hand. Here's a winch cable that we believe was operated by steam power up at the top, and they would pull the dinky cars up and down the mountain. This is a cool picture of some women, must have been on a Sunday, kind of going up the incline, I believe around Point View. Probably some of the ladies who lived at Point View at the time. Yeah, that was really nice. This is a picture of the incline, the Sylvan Incline. If you go up towards the game land, there's a road, an old turnpike road that when you go up 22 towards Williamsburg to almost get to the top, there's a little side road that cuts around the mountain. You can follow that road, and this will take you right to the game lands. And this is the Sylvan Incline ruins. You can see the cut. And if you go further along and park at the game lands, there's a second incline called the Hartman Incline. He built another incline that came down the mountain, and that's the incline. And when I came to that, that was really neat because you just see this opening and just start walking up the mountain. So it's a workout. At the top, you'll come to where they used to have a narrow gauge locomotive pulling the cars along to get along the mountain. Here's leftover Ganister rock from when they were coring. And I found some cable from the inclines just up there, some old iron cable. And I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of just take it home with me, but it basically disintegrated pretty quick. So I should have left it there, but lesson learned. You can find some dinky tracks up there, which is neat. And every now and then you get lucky, you can find some dinky tracks and nail spikes. But around World War II, there was a big effort, and a lot of people know that they recycled a lot of the former railroad and dinky tracks and whatever they could to help with the World War II effort. So a lot of it was removed. This is a neat picture, and if anyone knows, might have heard Canoe Mountain caught on fire last fall, and there's a big fire directly at this quarry. But you can see the ground's charred, but it kind of gives you a nice visual. See the levels there? They were running dinky cars up those mountains and getting Ganister rock. Jesse Hartman, around Canoe Mountain, they would quarry rock across at Point View, Spruce Point, Lock Mountain, and Flowing Springs. And this is one of their narrow gauge locomotives. You look on the front, it says Hartman, but this was their locomotives. They would run the mountains. I can't imagine just seeing that today, seeing steam on the mountaintops running around. You know, that would have been a sight to see back then. Here's an old loading tipple at Flowing Springs. Here's another dinky track at Spruce Point, where they ran dinky tracks along the mountain. And here's a picture across from Point View. And I just had some pictures, but if you actually ever get a chance to go walk along the game lands, you can actually walk along these old rail lines. It's a pretty fun time. One more site in Blair County is in Sproul outside of Claysburg on Sproul Mountain. This is a very large Ganister site operated, again, by Jesse Hartman, which would eventually sell out to General Refractories. And what's neat about this quarry is they actually had their own brick plant where they made the silica bricks. And these structures were loading tipples. The incline came down from above it. Looks like maybe a way station where they have these tracks here. And down below, they would take the Ganister rock down to Sproul. And if anyone knows where this is, it sits across the street from the Sproul sheets. Right now it's Rockland Manufacturing, but General Refractories operated there for almost 100 years, actually probably a little longer than 100 years. And they did a lot of silica bricks here till I believe about 1959, 1960. They actually made their own silica bricks, and then they got into patching, cement mortars for the refractory business. And I think they closed, I'm not sure when they closed, early, like 2016 or 15. I'm not sure exactly when they closed, but they're no longer in business there. But thousands of workers came to Claysburg to work at this site. My cousin's daughter, Emma Zockerl, she's 16. She's a really good artist. I had her paint this picture of the men working at the brickyard. I thought it was really cool. Okay, we talked about a lot of the industrial history with limestone and Ganister. Now we're just going to touch base on what limestone does today. Around the 20s and 30s, we started, we were getting into lots of transportation, trucks and cars, and our roads were a mess, a lot of mud, and, so they started using limestone for roads, and they started really pushing for better transportation. And especially around the Eisenhower, after World War II, realized our roads, our highway systems were terrible. And whenever they were in Germany, they were impressed with their road systems. And he's like, we have a problem here. If we ever have any issues in our area, we need to have military equipment move around our country pretty quickly. So they got into the interstate highway system, which Eisenhower really pushed. So we get into lots of limestone for concrete, blacktop for roads, road construction, turnpikes, bridges, and we played a lot of role in that here in Blair County. This is an early man from Hollidaysburg named Merle Gilday. This is when he came back from World War I. He fought in France, and he was a mortar. He dealt with mortars, but he came back safely. And it's a sad story. He only lived till 32, I believe. He was killed in an automotive accident, but he started out in a company in Altoona called the Wolf Company, and he helped develop the Wolf bicycle. He also then he would get into his own automobile repair shop and automotive business. So he was in the automotive business, and then he got into busing. He had a bus line in Williamsburg and a bus line in Altoona. And then he got the idea to get into the quarry business, the limestone industry, which he was really pushing forward. And he bought out some of the quarries in Bald Hill, and I believe this is where he's at around here, Bald Hill. He also bought another quarry, started a quarry along Reservoir Road, which is present-day site of Snowburger's topsoil. This is his crusher setup that sits right along Reservoir Road. If you guys ever see the crusher ruins, that's where they at. They sit right beside the quarry. Here's some of his ruins along Route 22 in Hollidaysburg. Right below Bald Hill, this is where his crusher sat, and they would bring their limestone down from Bald Hill. And it was sad. He had everything going for him. He had a quarry in Warts, quarry at Bald Hill, quarry along Reservoir Road. He also had a lime kiln. And sadly, at I think 32, was it 32, Jim? 32, 33, he was ironically hit by a hearse with a 17-year-old kid driving it, and he died a couple days later. The Gilday family is still around in Hollidaysburg, and we visited with them, and they showed us some of these pictures. But yeah, Merle had a heck of a run for a short time, but he was really involved. Another limestone industrialist, well, for the road and construction, was a man named Harold Howdy Ellenberger, which you guys might know of. Anyone know of him? He was from the El Dorado section. And his dad started the quarry back around the Great Depression. And you see this quarry is built right through I-99. So I-99 came in and built I-99 right through the quarry. But they had a really impressive limestone business for a long time. And this must be Howdy's dad. And they owned one of the Dixon dump trucks that were built here in Altoona. And here's a picture of the quarry before I-99 came through. And I met with his Howdy's daughters, and they were very nice. And Howdy actually had a car museum in El Dorado too. He had a lot of nice cars, but he was very well liked. And when I met with the daughters, they basically sold crushed rock. They didn't do any concrete or blacktop. They just sold rock all over Pennsylvania to anyone that wanted to buy it. But what a big site. Next big company here is Ganister Brothers. They're still in business today. And they started out in the coal mining industry, some brothers, and they got into coal mining. And then they started their own coal mine, strip mining, I believe. And then they got into excavating, and then they ended up they bought their first limestone quarry behind Bald Hill, Lower Scotch Valley Road, which still operates today. And they have a large quarry in Ganister. This isn't the best picture, but the quarry in Ganister is massive. It's huge. And they do concrete, blacktop, roads, and this is a nice company still. And this is the last company here, New Enterprise Stone and Lime. Everybody knows them. This is their first quarry in Waterside, which is right outside New Enterprise. And I believe they started around the 20s, somewhere around there. Here's some pictures of their early quarry. And did you have a question?
Later on.
What's that?
Maybe when you finish.
Okay, cool. So the New Enterprise, I didn't get a chance to talk with anyone personally there, but they are one of the biggest players in Pennsylvania for roads, award-winning projects, turnpikes, bridges. Just I could go on and on. They're an amazing company right here in Blair County. And here's one of their maps with all their locations. I believe they have over 60, I'm not sure exactly, but maybe up to 60 quarries. They're all over the place. In our book here, we wanted to introduce a company from the Southern Cove called W.L. Hall. W.L. Hall Trucking is William Lloyd Hall. He had said to be one of the first commercial trucks in Blair County. In 1913, he started his business he was in Lewisburg, and he had mules and wagons, or horses and wagons, and he would transport men from Lewisburg to the Altoona rail shops to work every day. He would bus them in. On the way back, he'd backhaul mail from Altoona to Lewisburg. He did this trip twice a day, and he also had a sawmill. And as things were advancing and New Enterprise Stone and Lime came to Waterside there, they got involved with New Enterprise, and W.L. Hall bought some trucks and was one of their first trucking subcontractors. And there's 4 generations in the Hall family, and they still operate today. And but I wanted to include them because they were heavily involved for all phases of the industrial limestone, transportation, lime for agricultural. They truck coal, they truck limestone. They did lime. They did snow plowing for the state. They were heavily involved in lime kilns. They actually had lime kilns early on, and they still do lime. They still spread lime on farmers' fields. So I thought it'd be fitting to include them in this book. There they are delivering some coal to a power plant. But that basically covers the limestone and Ganister industry in Blair County. And I really hope you enjoyed the presentation. So that's it. Okay.